My daughter has been taken by two men in a white van. They just drove off with her." Those were the desperate words of Luciano Fratellin when he called 911 on the evening of July 19, 2025. His frantic report about his missing 9-year-old daughter Melina triggered a massive Amber Alert across New York State. Police deployed K-9 units, helicopters, and forest rangers. The entire community of Ticonderoga mobilized to search for a kidnapped child. But 24 hours later, investigators would discover the most shocking truth. There was no white van. There was no abduction. The person who reported his daughter missing was the very person who killed her. Melina's body was found concealed in a remote pond, deliberately hidden under a fallen log with a rock placed on top. The preliminary autopsy revealed she died by drowning, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide. The same father who had called himself a loving parent on Instagram, who described Melina as the light of his life on his coffee company website, now stood accused of second-degree murder. The timeline was devastating. Melina had spoken to her mother at 6:30 p.m., telling her they were driving back to Canada. Less than 3.5 hours later, her father was calling police with his fabricated story. Somewhere in that narrow window, a vacation became a murder scene, and a parent became a killer. How does a loving father's frantic call for help become evidence of the most unthinkable betrayal? How does someone kill their own child and then mobilize an entire state to search for fictional kidnappers? If this already has you questioning everything you think you know about family trust, hit like and stay with me through this devastating case. 8 days earlier, on July 11th, 2025, at the US-Canada border, this story began with what seemed like an ordinary father-daughter vacation. Melina Fratellin was a bright-eyed 9-year-old from Montreal, living full-time with her mother since her parents' separation in 2019. She was excited about spending summer vacation with her father, whom she only saw during his visits to Canada. No one could have predicted this would be her final journey. Luciano Fratellin, 45, presented himself as the devoted entrepreneur. A dual citizen of Ethiopia and Italy, he founded Gambella Coffee in Montreal and maintained an active social media presence where he described himself as a loving father. On his company website, he called Melina the light of his life. But court records painted a different picture. 5 separate lawsuits filed against him in early 2025, including $26,000 in unpaid rent at a Montreal Airbnb property. Melina's mother had divorced Luciano in 2019, but harbored no concerns about this vacation. She trusted him completely with their daughter's safety. What she didn't know was that Luciano's own business website referenced an unfortunate event from February 2019 that had severely affected his well-being, the exact same period when their marriage ended. The vacation plan seemed straightforward. 8 days exploring upstate New York's Adirondack Mountains with a scheduled return on July 19th. That date held special significance. It was when Melina was supposed to return to her mother's full custody in Montreal. But someone had no intention of honoring that arrangement. July 19th, 2025 marked the final day of what should have been a peaceful father-daughter vacation. The timeline of that Saturday evening would become crucial evidence in understanding how a family trip transformed into a murder investigation. At 5:30 p.m. in Saratoga Springs, New York, surveillance cameras captured the last confirmed images of Melina alive. The footage showed her walking alongside her father, appearing healthy and content. She seemed like any other child enjoying vacation time, completely unaware that these would be her final recorded moments. 1 hour later at 6:30 p.m., Melina made her last phone call to her mother in Montreal. "We're on our way back to Canada, Mom," she told her mother, her voice calm and reassuring. There was no distress in her tone, no indication that anything was wrong. The conversation was routine, a daughter checking in before the drive home, a mother expecting to see her child the next day. Neither of them realized this would be their final conversation. What happened in the next 3 hours and 28 minutes would become the focus of a murder investigation. Between 6:30 p.m., when Melina spoke to her mother, and 9:58 p.m., when her father called 911, everything changed. This narrow window would later be identified by prosecutors as the time frame when Luciano allegedly murdered his daughter. At 9:58 p.m., Warren County 911 received the call that would trigger one of the largest search operations in the region's recent history. "My daughter has been taken by two men in a white van," Luciano reported, his voice filled with apparent panic. He claimed he had pulled over near exit 22 on Interstate 87 to step into the woods, and when he returned, Melina was gone. According to his account, he witnessed a white van fleeing southbound with his daughter inside. The response was immediate and massive. Within hours, an Amber Alert notification appeared on every phone across New York State. 9-year-old Melina Fradolin, missing and believed to be in imminent danger. The alert included descriptions of the alleged kidnappers and their vehicle, mobilizing thousands of citizens to watch for any sign of the missing child. Multiple law enforcement agencies launched coordinated search efforts. The New York State Police deployed K-9 units and aviation teams. Forest rangers combed through wilderness areas. The Warren County Sheriff's Office coordinated ground searches. Local police departments issued bulletins. Every available resource was directed toward finding a kidnapped child and apprehending her alleged abductors. But investigators were chasing phantoms. They were searching for an abduction that never occurred, tracking a white van that didn't exist, and hunting for kidnappers who were entirely fictional. The real perpetrator was the very person who had made the call for help. Sunday morning brought an unprecedented mobilization of resources across upstate New York. Search teams, helicopters, and K-9 units spread across the region, following every lead from Luciano's abduction report. But each piece of evidence they examined only deepened the mystery. The first major clue was the vehicle itself, a 2024 gray Toyota Prius that Luciano and Melina had been driving throughout their vacation. Police located and thoroughly examined the car, expecting to find signs of struggle or forced entry that would support the kidnapping narrative. Instead, they discovered the complete opposite. The vehicle showed no evidence of any struggle whatsoever. There were no broken windows, no damaged door handles, no blood, no torn fabric, nothing to indicate that anyone had been forcibly removed from the car. This absence of evidence directly contradicted Luciano's claim that two men had violently abducted his daughter. The second clue centered on the alleged crime scene itself. Luciano had specifically claimed the abduction occurred near exit 22 on Interstate 87, close to Lake George. Investigators conducted an extensive search of this area, combing through the roadside, nearby woods, and any location where a struggle might have taken place. Despite their thorough efforts, they found zero physical evidence supporting an abduction. No scuff marks on the pavement, no personal belongings dropped during a struggle, no tire tracks from a fleeing van. The location was completely devoid of evidence that any crime had occurred there. The third clue was perhaps the most telling: the mysterious white van. Every law enforcement agency in the region had been searching for this vehicle and its two alleged occupants. Despite massive manhunts, public alerts, and highway patrol surveillance, no van matching Luciano's description could be located. Multiple agencies checked traffic cameras, interviewed witnesses, and followed up on hundreds of tips from concerned citizens. The van had simply vanished because it had never existed in the first place. By Sunday morning, investigators began detecting serious inconsistencies in Luciano's account. The timeline he provided didn't align with established facts. The physical evidence contradicted his story at every turn. His emotional responses during questioning seemed inconsistent with those of a genuinely distraught parent. These mounting contradictions forced investigators to confront a disturbing possibility. The person reporting the crime might be the person who committed it. The investigation took a dramatic turn. Law enforcement made the decision to stop searching for kidnappers and start searching for a body. They redirected their efforts from pursuing fictional abductors to locating Melina herself. The search teams pivoted to Ticonderoga, New York, a remote area approximately 30 miles from the reported abduction site, a location investigators had discovered Luciano was known to have visited during their vacation. This shift represented more than just a change in search strategy. It marked the moment when a missing persons case transformed into a murder investigation. While search teams methodically combed through the Adirondack wilderness, the human cost of this tragedy became painfully clear to those who loved Melina most. Her mother, still believing her daughter had been kidnapped, struggled to comprehend the nightmare that had befallen their family. "I trusted him completely," she would later say through tears. Melina was so excited to spend time with her father. How do you explain to yourself that the person you trusted with your child's life took that life away? The weight of that trust, now shattered beyond repair, would haunt her forever. The small community of Ticonderoga felt the ripple effects of the tragedy immediately. News of the missing child had spread quickly through the tight-knit mountain town, and residents responded with the kind of collective grief that emerges when innocent life is threatened. Local resident Bridgette Cruz organized a vigil at Percy Thompson Bicentennial Park, where community members gathered with candles and flowers to show support for a family they had never met, but whose pain they deeply felt. "It's just so horrific and so sad," said Denise Molino, a longtime Ticonderoga resident who attended the vigil. "Someone that you should trust and love, the most important person in your life, could do something so horrific." Her words captured the universal horror that emerges when the sacred bond between parent and child is not just broken, but destroyed by violence. As hundreds of volunteers continued searching for what they believed was a kidnapped child, a small team of New York State Forest Rangers methodically worked their way through the most remote areas of Ticonderoga. Following their training and a growing suspicion about the father's known movements during the vacation, one ranger team headed toward a secluded pond deep in the woods. They moved quietly through the forest, unaware that they were about to discover evidence that would transform grief into something far more devastating. At 1:50 p.m. on July 20, 2025, less than 24 hours after the Amber Alert was issued, New York State Forest Rangers approached a remote pond deep in the Ticonderoga woods. What they discovered would completely rewrite the narrative of this case. In the shallow water, concealed beneath a fallen log, with a rock deliberately placed on top, lay the body of 9-year-old Melina Fradolin. This wasn't the scene of a random dumping or a panicked disposal. The careful concealment required planning, effort, and intimate knowledge of this isolated location. Someone had taken considerable time to hide the evidence, using natural materials to weigh down and camouflage the body in hopes it would never be found. The discovery raised immediate and disturbing questions. How does a Canadian tourist visiting for just 8 days know about this specific remote pond? How does someone supposedly searching frantically for his missing daughter end up being the person who concealed her body 30 miles away from where he claimed she was abducted? The geographic disconnect between Luciano's reported crime scene and the actual location of Melina's body was impossible to explain through his kidnapping narrative. Within hours of the discovery, law enforcement made a stunning public announcement that shattered any remaining belief in the abduction story. There is no indication that an abduction occurred, and there is no threat to the public. This statement represented a complete reversal from the previous day's massive manhunt for dangerous kidnappers. Police were no longer searching for external threats. They were looking at the person who had reported the crime as their primary suspect. The transformation was complete and devastating. 24 hours earlier, hundreds of people had been searching for kidnappers who threatened community safety. Now, investigators were examining evidence that a father had killed his own daughter and staged an elaborate deception to cover his tracks. The Amber Alert that had mobilized an entire state had been triggered by the very person who had committed the crime it was meant to solve. The pieces weren't adding up. Drop your theory in the comments. How did a father reporting his daughter missing become the prime suspect in her murder? On July 21, 2025, at Glens Falls Hospital, Dr. Michael Sikirica completed the autopsy that would eliminate any lingering doubt about what had really happened to Melina Fradolin. The forensic evidence would provide the definitive answer that no amount of fabricated stories could contradict. The autopsy results were both conclusive and damning. Cause of death, asphyxia due to drowning. Manner of death, homicide. These clinical terms carried devastating implications. Melina had not accidentally fallen into the pond. She had not been killed by mysterious kidnappers. The forensic evidence proved that someone had deliberately caused her to drown, and the methodical concealment of her body under the log and rock confirmed premeditation and consciousness of guilt. Captain Robert McConnell of the New York State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation made the official declaration that destroyed Luciano's entire narrative. Luciano Fratellin fabricated the initial report of the abduction. No evidence has been located to support the reports from Fratellin of an abduction involving a suspicious white van. With those words, the investigation transformed completely. The desperate father became the calculated killer. The grieving parent became the primary suspect. The search for external threats became an examination of the most intimate betrayal possible, a parent murdering their own child. The psychological contradiction was staggering. How does someone who publicly describes his daughter as the light of his life end up drowning her in a remote pond? How does a man who presents himself as a loving father mobilize hundreds of searchers to look for kidnappers he knows don't exist? The forensic evidence had answered the question of how Melina died, but it had opened an even more disturbing question about why. Investigators would soon discover 6 words in the grand jury indictment that would reveal the precise 65-minute window when a father became a murderer. The grand jury indictment would reveal the most damning evidence against Luciano Fratellin, a precise timeline that made his fabricated abduction story impossible to believe. According to prosecutors, Melina was murdered between 7:35 p.m. and 9:05 p.m. on July 19th, near Route 74 in Ticonderoga. This 65-minute window fell directly between her final phone call with her mother at 6:30 p.m. and Luciano's 911 call at 9:58 p.m. Criminal defense attorney Paul Darrow-Hanesian analyzed the prosecutorial strategy. The timeline is devastating for the defense. You have a child alive and well at 6:30 p.m. talking to her mother about going home. Less than 2 hours later, she's dead, and her father is calling 911 with a fabricated story. There's no room for external actors in that time frame. The specificity of this window eliminated any possibility that unknown kidnappers had intercepted Melina after her phone call. The prosecution had established that Luciano was the only person with access to his daughter during the critical period when she was killed. The criminal complaint provided chilling details about how Melina's body was discovered. She was found under a log with a rock on top, with the intent to prevent its discovery. This wasn't the panicked disposal of someone overwhelmed by a tragic accident. This was calculated concealment designed to hide evidence permanently. A forensic expert familiar with similar cases explained the significance. Drowning in a pond could be accidental. Concealing the body under debris with a weight on top, that's consciousness of guilt. That's someone who knows exactly what they've done and is trying to hide it. The deliberate placement of natural materials shows planning and forethought. The remote location itself demonstrated intimate knowledge of the area. Someone had taken time to select a spot far from hiking trails or public access points, suggesting they had scouted the location beforehand or possessed detailed familiarity with Ticonderoga's wilderness areas. Luciano Fratellin's public persona as a successful entrepreneur masked a complex web of financial troubles and personal struggles. His Gambella Coffee website portrayed him as a thriving businessman with multiple ventures in architecture, real estate, and mining. He described himself as devoted to family and claimed to have found peace after overcoming past difficulties. However, court documents revealed a stark contradiction. Despite his claims of business success, Luciano faced 5 separate lawsuits in early 2025, including a significant case involving $26,000 in unpaid rent at a Montreal Airbnb property. He claimed the property manager was responsible for these payments, but the property had been shut down as a short-term rental due to the dispute. The most revealing detail emerged from his own business biography. Luciano's website mentioned an unfortunate event in February 2019 that had severely affected his well-being and required a long and arduous road to recovery. February 2019 was precisely when he and Melina's mother became estranged and separated. This temporal connection suggested that whatever crisis had occurred in his life was directly linked to the breakdown of his family relationships. A criminal psychologist who reviewed the case materials observed, "When someone's entire life is built on maintaining an image that doesn't match reality, the pressure to keep that facade intact can lead to desperate acts." The timing of this vacation, ending the day Molina was supposed to return to her mother's full custody, suggests a potential breaking point where maintaining control became more important than anything else. Luciano's international background became a crucial factor in legal proceedings, particularly during bail hearings. As a dual citizen of Ethiopia and Italy, with Canadian residency and an international driver's license, he possessed unprecedented mobility that concerned prosecutors. Essex County District Attorney Michael Lange argued forcefully against bail. No amount of money would ensure that he would return. His international connections and alleged assets make him one of the highest flight risks we've ever encountered. He has businesses in Canada and Ethiopia, passports from multiple countries, and the resources to disappear permanently. The bail hearing revealed extraordinary contradictions in Luciano's financial claims. While declaring himself indigent and unable to afford legal representation, prosecutors presented evidence that he had recently bid on a $5 million property in Montreal, shown real estate agents a $30 million bank account statement, and attempted to sell a mining operation. These alleged assets stood in stark contrast to his lawsuits and unpaid debts, creating a picture of someone living between multiple financial realities. The judge ultimately denied bail, ruling that too much remained unknown about the accused to risk his release. On July 21, 2025, law enforcement moved decisively to arrest Luciano Fratellin. He was taken into custody and charged with murder in the second degree, a Class A felony carrying a maximum sentence of life imprisonment, and concealment of a human corpse, a Class E felony punishable by up to 4 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. The man who had triggered a statewide Amber Alert was now facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. The initial court appearance at Ticonderoga Town Court revealed the first of many contradictions that would define Luciano's legal strategy. Judge Tatiana Coffinger carefully read the charges against him while he stood before the bench, claiming he could not afford legal representation. This declaration of poverty came from the same man who prosecutors alleged had recently bid on a $5 million Montreal property and presented real estate agents with a $30 million bank account statement. Represented by a public defender, Luciano entered a plea of not guilty to both charges. The case represented far more than a standard criminal proceeding. The justice system was grappling with how to understand and prosecute someone who had allegedly killed his own child, then manipulated law enforcement and the public into conducting a massive search for fictional perpetrators. The calculated nature of the deception, from the detailed abduction story to the concealment of evidence, suggested a level of premeditation that chilled investigators. 9 days later, on July 30, 2025, the grand jury delivered their decision. Luciano Fratellin was formally indicted on all charges. When he appeared before the court for his bail hearing, prosecutors presented their case for why he should remain in custody. The arguments were compelling. His dual citizenship provided him with multiple escape routes. His alleged financial resources could fund an indefinite life in hiding, and his international business connections offered him sanctuary in countries without extradition treaties. Judge Coffinger agreed with the prosecution's assessment. Bail was denied. The court declared Luciano too dangerous to the community and too likely to flee the country to ever see freedom again before his trial. He was remanded to Essex County Correctional Facility, where he would await his day in court. The community of Ticonderoga struggled to process the transformation of their role in this tragedy. Hundreds of residents who had initially mobilized to search for a missing child now gathered to mourn a murdered one. Candlelight vigils replaced search parties. The same community members who had volunteered their time to look for dangerous kidnappers now realized that the person who had called for their help was the very person who had caused the harm they were trying to prevent. The emotional weight of this deception extended far beyond Ticonderoga. The case had captured national attention precisely because it violated the most fundamental assumption about family relationships, that parents protect their children from harm rather than cause it. If you're still watching this devastating case unfold, you're witnessing one of the most calculated deceptions in recent true crime. Smash that like button and share this story so Melina's memory lives on. Police had successfully established the who, the how, the when, and the where of Melina's murder. But the why a father would kill his own daughter and stage such an elaborate cover-up, remained officially unanswered. The investigation into motive continued, but some questions may never have answers that make sense to the human heart. The legal proceedings against Luciano Fratellin continue to move forward, with a tentative trial date set for January 5, 2026. However, legal experts predict significant delays due to the international complexities of gathering evidence from Canada and Ethiopia. Defense attorneys have indicated they may pursue a mental health defense, potentially adding months or years to the legal process. The case will test the limits of the American justice system's ability to prosecute someone with extensive international ties and alleged substantial assets. The small community of Ticonderoga has slowly begun to heal from the trauma of hosting such a devastating crime. Children have returned to playing in the local parks, families have resumed their summer routines, but the questions continue to linger in quiet conversations. How do neighbors trust again when the unthinkable has occurred in their backyard? How do parents explain to their children that sometimes the people who should protect us most are capable of causing the greatest harm? Melina's mother has chosen to grieve privately, declining interviews and staying away from the media attention that continues to surround the case. Her final words to her daughter during that last phone call: "Have a safe trip home," carry a tragic weight that no parent should ever have to bear. She had trusted completely, and that trust had been catastrophically betrayed. The remote pond where Melina was found has returned to its natural quiet. Occasionally, visitors leave flowers on nearby rocks, creating an informal memorial for a young life that ended far too soon. The location has become a symbol of innocence lost and trust broken in the most fundamental way possible. The central questions remain officially unanswered by investigators. Was this tragedy motivated by custody disputes, financial pressure, mental health crisis, or something else entirely that defies rational explanation? The truth is that sometimes the people we trust most completely are capable of acts that shatter every assumption we hold about human nature and parental love. 9-year-old Melina Fratellin had trusted her father completely. She had climbed into his car, excited for vacation, called her mother to report they were coming home, and believed in the safety that should exist between a parent and child. She never could have conceived that home was a destination she would never reach. Subscribe to TCI Crime Stories for more cases that challenge everything we think we know about family and trust. And tell us in the comments what case you want us to investigate next. In true crime, we search for answers. But sometimes the most important question isn't why something happened, it's how we protect the innocent from those who should love them most.